Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Restoring Human podcast, where we believe humans were designed to flourish. Unfortunately, we live in a culture now. I used to read this. We live in a culture where many of our modern conveniences work against that thriving. But through intentional lifestyle decisions, we can return to an optimal state of health. I am Jarek Bakken.
Dr. Alex Ruello.
We've been talking about the gut last week. Talked about what the gut is, how we kind of develop problems there. Now we're going to try to turn a corner a bit and talk about how to heal and talk about all of these creepy crawlies and the bacteria that's in there.
Yeah. So we'll hit on that first because that's kind of the last piece of what can go wrong with the gut. Something called two things with that. There's something called dysbiosis, which is just an abnormal balance of good bacteria to bad bacteria in your gut, or not even necessarily really bad bacteria that's going to cause some sort of serious infection, but what they call opportunistic bacteria. So at low levels, they even do some good things for us. Like yeast is one of these, so not even bacteria, but just other microbe. If we don't have enough of the kind of normal flora or bacteria, then these other ones can take the opportunity to grow and then potentially cause problems. So that's one issue that can happen with bacteria. The other thing is we can have either an overgrowth or just something that's not supposed to be in our gut that's there. So this would be like E. coli, people know, or salmonella, streptococcus, staph infections. All this stuff can be in our gut, and those are pathogenic bacteria. So those create problems in our gut. So if those are there, then that can also lead to a lot of symptoms. Most of the time, that's going to lead to actual digestive systems or issues, digestive system issues. But it can also then lead to either the leaky gut that we already talked about last week, which is then going to lead to issues. So I recently had a patient that has been really having some issues with thinks it might be rheumatoid arthritis or some other sort of joint type issue. And she had a lot of testing done. One of them was a stool sample, and we found this specific bad bacteria or pathogenic bacteria that was in her stool that studies have shown are linked. If that's high, it's going to lead to either rheumatoid arthritis or what's called ankylosing spondylitis. So, where she was going to other doctors and not really knowing what was going on, just kind of treating symptoms, trying to give her a medication to suppress her immune system so she wasn't feeling the pain. We hopefully found a cause of it so we can address that, and then our body can heal. With the overgrowth stuff, you can either have yeast overgrowth, so candida overgrowth. You can have just bacteria that's not supposed to thrive in your small intestine start to thrive. That typically comes from undigested food that bacteria eats. And the more you give it food, the more it's going to grow, the more it's going to spread. That's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO is what a lot of people know it as. So all these different issues can happen just because of the bacteria levels in your gut, whether there's too many good or too many bad, or these opportunistic ones jump on board, start causing you issues.
Sounds like a mess.
It can be a mess. There's over 400 different strains of bacteria that they've identified. I'm sure there's way more than that. Yep.
So what I just heard you say was it's not even bad bacteria is the problem. We need more good bacteria. We need a healthy, balanced gut.
Yeah, you need what's called bacterial diversity. So those 400 I just talked about, I meant but good bacteria, or even the opportunistic ones that are fine if you keep them at bay. we need a whole diversity of those things. People with higher diversity of these bacteria are the ones, those are the centenarians. Those are the people that they've looked at that blue zone study.
Mm-hmm.
People that really live the longest and are the healthiest. They have the healthiest diversity of gut bacteria. They did this study where they took kids in Africa that are just growing up in the woods, and they took their bacteria diversity compared to kids of the same age that grew up in Europe in urban areas, and it was drastically different.
Yeah.
The diversity of the kids in Africa was way better than the kids in Europe. And obviously you compare their health, and there's drastic difference in their health.
So how do we get a diverse gut?
Yeah. The number one thing would be preserving the bacteria that's already there. So kind of how life should happen is mom should be healthy. Mom should have good bacteria in her body. So she should have she shouldn't have any dysbiosis, right, that we talked about. She shouldn't have any yeast overgrowth, bacteria overgrowth, and then just full of good probiotics or good flora, good bacteria in her body. And then when she delivers a child, that's the first kind of injection of good bacteria that a child is supposed to get through the vaginal canal. I think it's like 35%, around 30% of births now in the United States are C-section. So those babies are now exposed to the air. So now they're exposed to also bacteria, but not the bacteria that they were intended to be exposed to day one of life, or first second of life even. So they kind of start off with not all the good bacteria that was supposed to be given to them through mom. They're starting off with bad bacteria on their body or in their body because they're exposed to that air right away. So that's kind of where it starts. And then through breastfeeding is also where mom passes on a lot of the bacteria that's happening, that's in her body. She's giving that to the child. We are supposed to play in the dirt to get be exposed to bacteria. We're supposed to just be outside and not be so freaked out about germs. We're supposed to be around all this stuff, and the more we're around it, the better diversity is going to happen. And then foods that are grown in the ground are also have dirt on them. So you've mentioned that book that Shax was talking about a couple different times, called Eat Dirt. That's not necessarily meaning eating dirt. It's eating foods that are grown in the dirt, or taking probiotics that are soil-based organisms. So we would, if we're living the life that we are trying to encourage people to live, the way they used to live, or the way somebody would live, in Africa, where they're more involved with nature and eating real food, they're going to have good levels of diversity of these bacteria that's in the gut.
Yeah, I want to back up just slightly, because two of the things that you kind of just buzzed over are probably highly controversial. What you described was the perfect scenario. And included in that were for lack of a better word, natural birth and a breastfed child. What I don't want people to hear is that C-sections are bad, non-breastfed babies are bad. Like the ability to birth a live child amidst other compromised scenarios, situations, circumstances, that's a phenomenal thing. So it's like, while there's probably situations where it's like, if it's a voluntary thing, like, yes, there's some muddy water there, but like, I don't want people to hear, this is a bad thing. It's one of those places where we talked early on about the kind of more emergency form of healthcare. It's a great thing we figured out how to do and preserve life.
Right.
So wanted to say that very similar thing with the breastfeeding. It's like, kids are anything but linear, and sometimes circumstances don't work out for that to happen. Like, uh, this is far more of a spiritual statement, but it's something that I always come back to thinking about things like this. It's like where the ideal is lacking, grace abounds, and we can deal with things in other ways.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's definitely important for people to, because I think, that high rate of C-section that I talked about, a lot of that is voluntary.
sure.
Right? It's not emergency C-sections that are done. So if people actually knew the long-term effects of not
Mhm.
birthing a child vaginally, then
Yeah.
there would be a lot less of those voluntary
Yeah.
C-sections happening.
Yeah.
But 100%, if it's an emergency situation and you're deciding whether I'm going to actually have my child be born alive or be born with good bacteria, of course you're going to have your child be born alive, and hopefully, as you said, grace abounds.
Yeah.
There can be interventions after that to bring that child to reach its health potential. But yeah, those are just that's, like you said, kind of ideal what would happen. But then it doesn't stop there. It's not like, if you were delivered vaginally and you were breastfed and you played in the dirt all the time and you ate real food when you were younger. It's not like, oh, I'm set for life.
Sure.
That's stuff that always has to be happening. You're what's called the microbiome. So kind of that whole state of your digestive tract as it comes to bacteria, that can change in 24 hours. That can change from everything that we talk about, right? Bad sleep, stress, not exercising, eating bad food, and everything else, toxicity, of all the stuff we talk about, that can change your microbiome for the bad, but it could also be changed for the good if you do the right stuff. So, yeah, it's not like we can ever stop doing this.
Yeah. So there's not only are there ideals that a lot of us are probably not hitting. Most of us are on the extreme negative side of that, and we probably need some extra things beyond just what's normal.
Yeah.
What are some of those types of things?
What are some of the things that we can do to improve it?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't even finished
Oh,
I haven't
sorry.
even finished what we need to
I haven't
avoid.
even gotten to the good yet.
What we need to avoid. So it's kind of how life starts off. So doing those things to avoid creating dysbiosis or creating the overgrowths. But then there's so many antibiotics.
Okay. Okay.
So people taking antibiotics when they're sick. There's antibacterial soaps that people put all over their hands. But then most of the antibiotics, I think it's a crazy number. It's like 80 or 90% of the antibiotics aren't actually used for infections. They're used for the food that we eat to put in. They're injected into cows or other livestock to fatten them up and to prevent, basically get the cow to slaughter, keep them alive enough from dying from an infection to get them to slaughter. So if we're eating, non-organic food, specifically animal products, then we're getting a lot of antibiotics in our body, which is just going to throw this, the proper microbiome off a lot. But now what can we do? Continue avoiding all those things as much as you can, right? And again, not saying that, you're never going to have to use an antibiotic, but, that should be worst case scenario.
Sure.
If you could do other things to prevent that from happening. Again, I think the ease that we have of taking an antibiotic is because we don't have an understanding of how important having good bacteria in our gut is. But you literally destroy them when you take an antibiotic, and it's very difficult to get the diversity back. But probiotics, I think everybody's probably heard of probiotics now. We can take those as a supplement, which can be helpful. Obviously, there's going to be better probiotics than others. There's some specific things we can talk about with probiotics. Maybe we'll wait till we talk about supplements to get into specifics about that. But then there's eating fermented foods that are just developing their own probiotics. That would be things like kind of lower level would be yogurt. Kefir would be another level to that. There's things like kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha tea. All these things are fermented, so they're going to have good bacteria in them. So that can help with the diversity. There is continuing to be outside in nature and play in the dirt. There is having pets. that you're interacting with physically that have been outside playing in the dirt. There is what are called prebiotics. So you can take probiotics to try to restore the population of the gut bacteria, but you can also take or just eat prebiotics, which feed the ones that are already there. And like I talked about with the bad bacteria, if they're eating food, they're going to thrive. Well, if you're feeding the good stuff, then they're going to thrive. So you can increase diversity as well as population numbers of the good bacteria with prebiotics. So those would be things like polyphenols, things that are in garlic and onions and curcumin and leeks and all kind of other weird stuff.
Is that coffee too?
Coffee has a lot of polyphenols. Green tea has a lot of polyphenols. Wine even has polyphenols.
Ooh.
Resveratrol, which is one of them that's in wine. So yeah, feeding your bacteria that, and then there's something called resistant starch that is so potato starch would be a resistant starch. There's a number of different things like that. Inulin is another prebiotic. Oligosaccharides is another prebiotic. So these are all things that we can feed ourselves to allow the bacteria to thrive. So that's kind of what the point of fiber. Fiber obviously helps with gut motility, and that's what most people know fiber's for. If you don't eat fiber, you're backed up, but fiber feeds the bacteria. That's its main job. So that's what, if you're feeding it the right stuff, they're going to thrive, and it's going to keep your gut healthy. So yeah, those are some things that you could do from the bacteria standpoint.
So get outside, get in the dirt. We can be supplementing over the top with stuff like probiotics, prebiotics, eating fermented foods, drinking fermented drinks, all those things.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sorry to cut this short, but we're really pushing our time here. We're definitely not done talking about this. So stay tuned for more on this. Do you want to tease other areas that you would want to get into?
Yeah, I would like to. I mean, there's if anybody has any sort of specifically autoimmune disease or headaches, skin issues, anything that really, from what we've already talked about, could be linked back to the gut, which is really any health issue. If you have health issues back to the gut, there's really 4 basic things that you need to do to heal your gut. And if it's not to a point where you have some sort of full-blown disease, it's pretty easy to do. So we'll get into that.
Cool.
Next time.
Sweet. Thanks again. Brought to you by Great River Family Chiropractic. Go to thatword/restoringhuman.com. Not restoringhuman.com. I shouldn't have tried to rush this. Great River Family Chiropractic.com/restoringhuman. Get yourself a free chiropractic consultation with this guy over here. I thought you were flexing. Pulling your arms up.